What's up, everyone? Andrew from Nine Leaders, and today I'm incredibly excited about the conversation I'm about to have. Jon Foster-Pedley is the Dean of Henley Business School, Africa. He is renowned globally as a thought leader, and he's going to be sharing today with us some of his thoughts on what the future world looks like. And this is particularly relevant to this community where Nine Leaders' vision is to equip new and experienced leaders with the skills required to take on 2021 and beyond. So Jon is going to share a huge amount of wisdom with us. Enjoy this video and take out as much as you possibly can. This is the first time to the channel. Welcome. It's great to have you. Don't forget to smash the subscribe button down below. And if you get some value out of this video, a like would really be appreciated. So this is Jon Foster-Pedley, and enjoy. Jon Foster-Pedley, welcome to Nine Leaders. It is absolutely fantastic to have you. Are you keeping well?
Very well, thank you. In spite of this pandemic and lockdown, somehow we're thriving. It's a delight to be here, Andrew. Thank you. Love your program.
I really do appreciate you taking the time. So there's a lot that I want to jump into today, obviously with regards to your position, the role that you play in the South African economy in the broader sense, but specifically in executive education, obviously as the Dean of Henley Business School, one of the top schools globally, particularly in Africa and South Africa, but really get your viewpoints on what the future holds for us as a country and executive education in particular. But I wanted to get started a little bit beforehand, just to understand a little bit of your background. Now, I've done a little bit of digging, and I believe you were an RAF pilot, the Royal Air Force. You played.
Only in a minor way. I went to Royal Air Force Academy on a scholarship, which I won when I was 15. So I started my gliding at 16, my flying at 17. And then I did the first year of military academy, which I loved. And flew there, but doing lots of officer training. You can imagine what that was like. It's a bit of a boot camp.
Yeah.
And then they wanted us to get degrees. So my dad sent me off to the Polytechnic of Central London to study sociology with my mate there. In the middle of the most transformational time in London's and Europe's history, I think, at the end of the hippie era.
I can imagine.
And I had a most extraordinary time. And of course, my career took a very big change in direction during those days.
Yeah. Leading in from that perspective into executive education, you've been involved for over 30 years in executive education. What sort of got you started in the side of the working with business schools?
That's really interesting. I think I dropped out of my undergrad degree because I became sort of, no, I don't want to do this. I want to travel the world and, fight the system and turn the world upside down and be a radical. I wanted to go to India to find my guru and do all the other things that people wanted to do. Grew my hair down there. And so I didn't complete that, but I then carried on to many, many other things. I'll tell you one day if you want to. Until later in my 20s, I decided, well, I better pull myself together and become a pilot. I said, I was good at a few things, selling, I was good at flying. So why don't I sell airplanes? So I got a job selling used airplanes, lots of stories behind that.
I can imagine.
And then I worked my way up to become a commercial pilot, all by borrowing money. I had nothing. And I remember I walked into Barclays Bank in Jersey to see Mr. Berman, the bank manager. I'll never forget him. I had nothing. 20 kilos of baggage and the guitar, I think. And I said, can I borrow a whack of money? And he looked at me, what's your collateral? And I said, what's collateral? So I had nothing. Anyway, he looked at me and he said, what do you want it for? I said, I want to become a flying instructor. So he looked at me and said, okay. And then he lent me a whack of money for no good reason, Mr. Berman from Barclays.
Oh, wow.
And then I borrowed some more. And then for many years, I worked my way through as instructing and then did my exams as a commercial pilot with my instrument rating, got a job back in South Africa where, when I say back, I met lots of South Africans in my alternative years and thought I'd love to go to the place. And then I paid back that money for years and years and years with nothing to my name. An old Volkswagen, which had been stolen so many times, even the button was gone. I had to tie the wires together to start it. And I lived like that for many years. So, and it was good character building stuff. And then I then I became a commercial pilot and an airline pilot and did a lot of other things. And when I left full-time flying, as I was an airline captain for a small airline in Johannesburg, and my mum was dying in England. So I went back and joined British Aerospace selling airliners in Africa. I joined the manufacturers, and I was wandering around Africa doing all sorts of interesting deals or trying to do them. And that was another book in there somewhere. And during that time, I thought, well, I dropped out of my degree. Although I got my commercial pilot's license, I'd done very well in my exams, etc. I said, I really wish I hadn't. I should get myself qualified again. And then I heard about the thing called the MBA, and I said, wow, that's exactly what I meant, because I felt rather naked in corporate. All these people were wandering around with all the jargon, IRR this and MPV this and the 4 Ps of that. And I knew nothing of that. I was just an ex-hippie pilot, flying instructor, now selling airplanes. And I thought, I better get myself geared up with some knowledge. So I said, I'd like to do an MBA. And I met, my boss at the time was Tom Saunders. Now, you probably know French and Saunders from Absolutely Fabulous.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Well, it's Jennifer Saunders' dad. And he used to tell me great stories about Jennifer Saunders and the comedians. He was a lovely guy. And he said, nah, I got a job offer as a flying instructor so I could do my MBA in Scotland. And he said, no, don't do that. We'll sponsor you for an MBA down the south of England here. And he did.
That's brilliant.
And I got into Cranfield, and then I heard about Ashridge, which was the second MBA they'd ever done, the most expensive in Europe at the time. And by some miracle, I had to get a high GMAT. I got accepted. And he paid for the whole lot, plus my full salary. And I did a fully sponsored MBA with one of the best business schools in Europe, while I was on full salary as well.
That's amazing.
So I was extremely lucky, and I loved it. And then doing my MBA was like coming home. And I thought, wow, I love the research. And it just intellectually, everything clicked. And I said, wow. So I then became an organization development consultant instead of, I turned down a job as a marketing director for British Aerospace, part of them, and became an OD consultant, a bit like you are as a coach, working with all these psychologists. It was a phenomenal time for me. Tough though. I was my first marriage then. It was breaking up at that time, sadly, and so it wasn't an easy time. And then I got into executive education, and then a job came up in France as a collaborative venture, as a marketing director, as a joint venture with Airbus and the other aerospace manufacturers to set up a college for the French, for the European aerospace industry. And I went as marketing director, but I ended up as head of education development. And then I started teaching, and did part-time teaching on MBAs. And before that, I met a fascinating man called Ralph Stacey, who was a South African, unknown South African, but one of the world's leading executive education complexity theorists. Wonderful man. So he was my mentor. And then I carried on teaching. And then when that job came to an end, I thought, well, what am I going to do? So South Africa just changed. I said, maybe I'll go back to South Africa as an academic. And I just got these job offers, and I joined UCT as teaching strategy. And then I designed their MBA program. Their executive MBA program, was the first director of that. And that was, again, phenomenal. And then I did other things, headed up their exec ed, went to New Zealand, came back, and then this job came along. And for 10, 11 years, I've been Dean of Henley.
Fantastic.
We were 5 people. We had practically no revenue, and now we're 85 people. We've 4 times won the award from PMR for the best MBA business school in South Africa. Well, I don't take these rankings too seriously, but we've got the biggest MBA scholarship program in Africa, I think, and I think we've been the fastest growing business school in Africa over those last 10 years, and we have a really interesting culture. It's dynamic, and that's us. Yeah,
no, it's brilliant.
That's a very potted history of my bizarre career path.
But isn't that so usual in terms of, so often nowadays when we talk about education, how many people go and study at university, they get a degree, and then how many of them actually end up in that actual field that they studied? It's such a motivational story to hear you saying that, moving from that pilot space, that the 60s, the hippie side of things, to a place now where you're massively respected globally with regards to academia, with regards to business and executive education. In the 30 years that you've been in executive education, what are some of the biggest changes you've seen? It's obviously quite a dynamic field. Business is always changing. So what is for you, what has been the biggest changes that you've seen over the last 30 years?
Well, funnily enough, some of the most important things haven't changed. I mean, I remember when I did my MBA, we did a lot of process work. We thought a lot about people. We were quite challenging. And I think that those skills of working with people, facilitation, etc., are really important. I mean, I've been a flying instructor for many years, so I think I got my love of educating people partly from that. I mean, I just love teaching people how to fly. But I think some of the changes, I remember on my MBA, somebody said to me that a woman who was heading up the design council, really good, came along and talked about design. Or maybe it was a design firm. She said, you know, design is going to be the big thing going forward. And yeah, sure enough, before long, along came, after a good, healthy gap, along came all the IDEO work and design thinking work.
Yeah.
And all the work that Roger Martin did around that at Rotman and many, many others, building up this idea of design thinking. And then we had the introduction of people like Otto Scharmer with his youth theory work, and many, many more people talking about, you know, a very different approach to leadership and thinking about leadership. But then there was a gene pool of that for a long time. Even if you go back to Peter Drucker and Carl Weick and a number of other, and Carl Rogers, there was this, always was this counterculture of people within executive education doing the Mintzberg thing, saying you can't learn management on an MBA. Managers, not MBAs. It's all about management practice. It's all about awareness and presence and being there and messy work. And there was this other school, which was the elitist school, if you like, of clear rationality. But that no, you can learn everything, and there's a real rational base to business. It's a science, and all of which is partly true, and all of which is partly not true. So I think the biggest change I've seen over the last few years, certainly in South Africa, a huge change where we've come to be a lot more aware of what the reality of learning about doing things is, a transition. We're a country full of undereducated but intelligent people, most of whom I think don't feel they're intelligent because they're equating education with intelligence. Those two are not the same thing. All education does is amplify intelligence. It doesn't give it. And mostly our normal human brain, the normal ordinary person is phenomenally capable. You don't have to be extraordinary. That's another big thing I'm going on about now, this idea we all have to be extraordinary super gods to succeed. We don't. We've got all the kit we need just as we are. But I think I've seen quite a lot of changes. You know, the movement of complexity theory was a big one coming through. You know, this sort of metaphorical, figurative ideas for management around quantum. A lot of things that are very out there and are very trendy. You know, there are these magpies who collect ideas and go on the extremes and talk about them. We all have to follow them, but they are deeply lacking in groundedness, many of them. And I think the movement away from the hero worship of frameworks and models. I mean, you know, so when you look at Porter's 5 forces or the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 15 P's of marketing, whatever it is, all a framework does is guide your thinking to think of those things. You know, I think of the 5 P's, you know, and I think of people and place promotion, etc. And so that's what I look at. I sort of triage my whole reality into seeing things in those clusters, and we categorize things. That's really helpful. What we don't realize is how much that blinds us to the other thing. Once you categorize your thinking in a sense is amplified but trapped. You've looking down a telescope at this thing, but your peripheral vision is lost if you don't watch out. And I mean, you're probably a star watcher. And when you go and look at the stars, what do you see? And can you give them names? I mean, you know.
My astronomical knowledge, I must be honest, is like my guitar skills, seriously lacking. They just look pretty to me. I like to look up and make.
Do you look at the Southern Cross?
Pictures. Well, yeah, you see that. But fortunately, my framework there is that I'm actually not great at constellation, so I actually don't know. So
You're lucky. Because the moment you can see Orion and Scorpio and
That's all you
Gemini,
see.
yeah, and the Mars, yeah, you start you hunt for those patterns,
Yeah.
and that is what you see. You don't, and if you move 2 light years right or a millennia back, you probably wouldn't see the same pattern anyway, because things move relatively. You're only seeing that infinite space from this angle, but you put such deep reality into them. And then we build stories around these things. The ancient Greeks and other people did their stories and myths around these ideas they put in the sky there. But a lot of these frameworks are like that. We confuse the framework with truth. And so early stage people who are studying MBAs can quote Michael Porter and they can talk to 5 chords. They don't realize it's just a guitar that you have to play.
Yeah.
You know, you can pick up Michael Porter's 5 forces first time, it'll make some music, but you improve it. It's just a way to help your mind focus. And then you have to go beyond the theory you've got there. You have to be able to critique and find its limitations, find out what is hiding and how it's limiting your perception as well. And so I think in the early days, one of the big changes in the decade is we're much more prone to understand that we have to understand causality ourselves. We've become a lot more comfortable with system thinking and complexity ideas, which are not the same thing at all. And we're much more aware of ourselves as individual agents rather than thinking we have to fit into some sort of fantasy of a corporate clone.
Yeah.
And that corporate clone isn't just a suit or whatever you wear, it's thinking. And again, the other thing that's happening is there's a continuing and deeper challenge to the precepts of what we think business is, or the fundamental economic assumptions underlying them. This sort of Milton Friedman approach is deeply challenged. We're looking at a radical review of what we think capitalism is, particularly in the view of what's happening to our planet, and the toxic consequences of doing something that damages not only planet but people, keeps people in poverty. Actually, the unintended or rather the hidden consequences of those models are dangerous. We've got a massive change ahead of us. So executive education wasn't executive anymore. And what's the limits of education? You know, so we say executive education, we know exactly what we mean. But, you know, do we? What's an executive? What's education? Where do we learn? How do we learn? What's worth learning? You know, what do we learn? You know, what do we learn for? And why is a business school about learning? What's the limit of a business school? What should a business school do? Should it stop doing this, or should it collaborate with these people? So what is learning per se? So the whole thing is a very mystifying and bewildering animal once you start unpacking it. That's why we run back to our safe havens of our nests and cocoons that we're comfortable to talk about it with. But I think we're more ready to dart out sideways now. Does this make any sense at all to you?
Absolutely. Sure. And I think in terms of that, do you think the last 12 months of what we've gone through has fast-tracked any of that thinking? That as much as those frameworks in the past have benefited and they've worked in a certain context, we're sitting in a completely brand new context now, potentially. Has that fast-tracked sort of that management thinking as to, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but let's rethink the way we do things, not necessarily what we do, but more potentially how we do things?
Well, there is a certain sort of maturity, I suppose, one goes through in approaching learning and business school education, etc. Firstly, you know, you get these models, wow. And depending on your mindset, you either rip into pieces and hate them, or you get captivated by them. And then you become that sort of single issue activist type of person who's just hammering on this one thing. But then good education should give you contrary points of view. Should seed dissonance within you. So here's a wonderful, you love that theory, and then somebody gives you another one. And intuitively, you know, there's something at odds with this here. It's not quite, and you feel that. A good educator will do that to you without explaining how or why, in order, in a sense, to get that little grit in your brain that starts working on you to create the pearl in the oyster, you know. And then you'll see another point of view, and you say, well, which is right? So, well, maybe none of them, you know, maybe they're useful. What do they give you? And then you start to learn these models. I'm not a martial arts artist, but I did a little once. But I do know in karate, you learn katas, you know, stylized movements. And you do more and more and more. And I think you get your white belt, where you just struggle, you get a yellow belt or green or whatever it is you go through. And then as you do it, you get more and more fluid in using these things. So you internalize them, you can combat, and you get your black belt. And then you get multiple dans of black belts. And if you leave that black belt out in the sun again long enough, it just bleaches to white again.
Yeah.
And you completely internalize. The craft is internalized. In fact, you forget it. It's sort of like a Zen thing almost. And it's a bit like that with these models. You learn these models, you internalize them, but then you start just using them within their limits. You see their limitations. So I think that it's important when we are doing executive education to give people this capacity to go through a maturation process, learn, challenge, be the radical teenager, challenging everything again, and then you've got to bring them all together. So you can't ditch everything out. You mentioned baby in the bathwater, and that's what the next phase is. Okay, I've learned my MBA, but now it's all rubbish. Now I'm going to throw it all out and do something else entirely.
Yeah.
That's not very effective either. And before long, you realize you've got to balance tensions. The upside of freedom with the upside of control. Yeah. Freedom has a downside too, the anarchy, chaos, disorder. Control has a downside, which is bureaucracy and complete paralysis. Each of those are tending towards dissolution and death. Whereas, freedom plus enough control creates a dynamic tension. When I was at school, we used to play conkers in England, and conkers is a little thing off our chestnut tree. You bake it really hard. It's a big round seed like that. Okay. And the kids drill a string through and tie a knot on it, and you hold these things and you try and bash your other person's conkers. Mostly bash everyone's knuckle. And but if you hold a conker on a string, you whirl it round. The faster you go, the tighter you have to hold it.
Yeah.
And so the thing about creativity is that the more creativity you have, the more, in a sense, you have to have a type of control, not the bureaucratic control, but a type of control that stops the whole thing tending to dissolution, entropy. Yeah. So I think that what you learn as you go through executive education is to start managing these balances, and then you realize that a lot of these are subjective. And the big challenge is we are taught to revere objectivity, rationality, objectivity. Here's the model, here's the thing. And of course, that's really helpful. Science is really, really good. But when you're looking at the end of the day, we actually, although we don't admit it, we prefer subjectivity. You prefer, you've got these deep MBA analyses, these booklets, but somebody's got to interpret those into the 2 or 3 page gem, the intelligence brief, that synthesizes all those different points of view, puts it in context, and then you share it. And that's a subjective process. It's an interpretative sense-making process, dealing with very, very complex nuances and perspectives. And you're trying to, it's almost like these epiphanies come to you.
Yeah.
There's much been written about that. And I think that that's where good education goes. It gives you some models to go galloping off in a certain way, but then it becomes about life. It's just another tool for thinking about life, the activities of humans in organizations, what we call profit, why profit, what's that about? What's the purpose of that actually? How does that help humans to thrive? Does this kill our planet? What do we want our kids to do? What are we going to put in place now? So good education starts to grapple with all these. Why? Because good leaders have to grapple with all those. And that's what good leadership does. Good leaders have to deal with increasing levels of complexity. Some good leaders contextually simplify everything down to a mantra or a dogma, and they'll get massive followers, but I didn't vote for Trump. So,
I love
what I mean?
Absolutely. I love the analogy that you use with regards to martial arts. And again, my background, I've had years of martial arts training.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Started in karate, actually.
I could tell by the rather Zen-like background.
And I lived in Japan for 3.5 years, so there's a lot of that aspect. But to your point, very much the katas and the structures are the starting point. When I got my first Dan black belt, you go through a bit of an initiation in your club where you have to fight all the black belts. And then at the end, you're sort of welcomed into the group. as part of one of them, and each black belt would give their own piece of advice. And one of the advice that I got was that the black belt is a starting point. You've now got the basics down. You've got the structures, you've got the platform on which to build your own style effectively. You're still working within the parameters of the organization or the structures, like I said, but you start to develop your own, you start to apply the lessons and the structures that you've used in new contexts. And one of the things my instructor did when I was down in Cape Town was, at that stage, it was an exclusive part of the Black Belt Club that you started actually once a month. We'd bring in artists from different martial arts to share with us and train us on their particular version of how they saw self-defense and the art as itself. And it just created a whole level of new thinking, because now you're exposed to something different. You've got your platform, you've got your grounding, and now being exposed to something completely different, whether it's ground fighting or wrestling or whatever it was, it just completely gave you a new mindset as to how you could apply what you've already learned. And I think that, again, in this new world, it's a huge opportunity to be able to do that from a leadership perspective and management, particularly from a Henley side of things. You mentioned being part of, from an academia aspect. Business schools are very often seen as that academic, philosophical entity around business, whereas the interaction that I've had, not only with Henley, but a lot of the other business schools around South Africa, is very much around that practical application. And one thing that really stood out for me over the last 12 months, watching Henley's journey, was how quickly you responded to the situation with the pandemic, and how quickly within a 2-week period, you actually pivoted your entire business online. Talk me through that. How did that come about? What was the thought process that you used to really make that decision, and the effect of that in terms of the business?
Well, let's play with your martial arts background again.
Yeah.
And you're an nth Dan, right?
Correct. Nth, yeah.
And you're Zen, okay, whatever. You're getting there. You're getting to the Bruce Lee moment.
Yeah.
All that's kind of. When you are taught then to fight,
yeah,
are you taught to how is your mental state? How are you taught for your mental state? Are you watching every little move of every foot specifically, or what is the state of being that you're supposed to hold?
Surprisingly, it's the biggest advice always in terms of when I was fighting someone from my instructor was, you look them in the eyes. If you can see the eyes and you're at a particular distance, you can see the entire body. So from that stand-up fighting perspective, you can see the entire body by looking at someone in the eyes. Whereas in a ground fighting, because it's so close, your entire body becomes the eye, because that feeling is so much more closer, the grappling aspect. So it's that intense focus on what is actually happening in the context that I find myself in, whether it's environmental factors.
So how do you think most people respond to the idea of your whole body becomes the eye? You know,
I think unless you actually,
yeah.
I think unless you've actually been in it, it sounds a bit esoteric and it sounds a bit wishy-washy. But that awareness, I think, is probably the biggest word. That you use the word Zen. It's that awareness of what is happening in the context that you find yourself in.
So when you're looking a person in the eye, and I noticed the first thing about you when you interviewed me, you've got a very direct engagement in the eye. You're very good at it. And I thought, well, here's a live wire. Okay. But you're not, but that's the point. If you're angry looking me in the eye, yeah, you're staring them in the eye like that, aren't you? I mean, how's your peripheral vision when you're angry?
No, it's zero.
But when you look in the eye like this with a certain detachment and relaxed,
yeah,
how's your peripheral vision?
You start picking up everything. Yeah.
Now let's take that as a metaphor.
Yeah.
How do we respond? So let's say you hold yourself in a position where you are staring reality in the face. Now, every time somebody moves a hand, you'll probably get scared, right? And you're tempted to look at it and focus on that, but you're trying not to, aren't you?
Yep.
You're trying to hold your fears, keep yourself looking at the whole thing and see, and by being detached and having your peripheral vision, you can see the parts move and you're not responding to the one. But the moment you do that, the other one's going to hit you, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you maintain an attitude of sort of detached understanding and awareness. Okay. Pilots do the same. It's called airmanship. You have to be situationally aware.
Yeah.
Because the airplane is going to hit you, doesn't move relative to you, because it's small there, it just stays in the same position relative to you, just gets bigger. You cannot notice it until too late, bizarrely enough, because your eye is not catching movement. So you actually have to selectively scan and look around. You have to detach. When you're trained as a pilot, you have to detach from the panic. There's examples of a crash that happened when the undercarriage wouldn't go down, the three gears wouldn't go on. The pilot, the co-pilot, and the flight engineer became obsessed with playing with the knobs, as in the hold, I think it was over Florida, until they ran out of petrol. They didn't monitor the petrol, and then they crashed. So there's something important here. The idea of this sort of detachment, what Norman Adamy from SAB will call make reality your friend. And you can't be on autopilot if you're a pilot. You can't be on autopilot if you're a leader. You can't be on autopilot. You can be automatically responsive, but you can't be just switched off. You've got to be hugely aware and engaged. There's another great example I heard of it. There was Andy Cole and Dwight York, who used to play for Manchester United. Remember, they were like this legendary pair.
Yeah.
And they knew where each other was on the field. Just they knew, and the ball, it's like be where the puck is, that thing from, they always got the ball ahead where the person was going to run.
Yeah.
I saw another video in a training of two super expensive football players. It's a bit like Messi and Ronaldo or something, pulled into the same team. They hated each other, but they were the two most expensive in the world. And they fought and fought. That's why I asked you about that narrow vision. There was this photograph, the video of the ball looping into the penalty area and bouncing. And these two people steaming down to it. And they were so focused on getting it, so competitive. They literally didn't see each other. Their whole peripheral vision closed down and whack. And they hit each other. The ball bounced over past the goal, over the goal line. And it was just this whole attitude. So how do we respond? Well, it's like that. We have there's a book called Super Forecasting by Tetlock and Gardner. It's got a number of characteristics in it, 4 major characteristics about your stance, the way you deal with problems, etc. And so what we cultivated, I suppose, in Henley was fast growing. We're rational, but we had a system thinking model underneath Henley. So we understood the key drivers. We didn't do normal strategy. I mean, I'm a strategist. And I didn't do vision, mission, all that sort of stuff. Quite the opposite. What I did was create an alternative framework that worked on the key drivers of the business, managing purpose for anything else, reframing Africa, creating a context where people wanted to come, making a place where key performers and designers and teachers could do the best work they ever could do, and giving them the freedom to some degree to do that within the value set we had.
Yeah.
And setting up a broad set of competencies who are able to be flexible in difficult situations. And so come COVID, we'd already had a habit of being aware and scanning. And our purpose was build the people who build the businesses that build Africa. It wasn't give people MBAs so we can get bigger and whatever. Yeah. Our growth and our profits are a consequence of both what we do and of good management. So you can't not make profits because somebody has to clean up your mess. You're being incontinent if you don't make profits. Somebody's got to pay for you. So you just got to have the right discipline, but don't profiteer. So it so happened I'd been skiing, and sounds great. I've been skiing in Italy. And as I was sitting up in the north of Italy, I kept hearing about this bug going on down in south of Italy around Milan. And I got back to Milan and out. I spent a few days in Milan at a conference. It was wonderful, full of people. But I kept hearing about this, and I got out just in time, and then Milan closed down. And so we had this predisposition to be open and aware. And part of our secret is we do literally try and stay aware to what's going on. And we don't get caught in the dogma or the structure or the academic drive. We have a mission which is providing value. We have to make that work in any context. That's part of what we do. And so we're aware to it. My background, I suppose, in flight safety and aviation and airlines and aerobatics, what I used to do, again, it's a bit like that. You're spinning around. You've got to be very aware of everything. You can't panic. You've got to understand where the earth is relative to you all the time.
Yeah.
So it's about being in that sort of context. We were quite good at that. So I could see it was just like this. It was obvious what was going to happen, that this wasn't going to stay here. If it can happen in Italy, elsewhere, it's obviously going to get here.
Yeah.
It was just like obvious. And so we started responding. And then I became quite unpopular because I kept pushing and stopping people touching things and moving them away from each other. More than one people lose their rag at me. But we had to. And so because of that, it became clear that we were going to go into lockdown, to me anyway, and then increasingly more people. And then we started preparing for lockdown, getting equipment in place, thinking what it meant, transitioning from face to face. We were just visualizing, letting go of our fears and our attachments, and letting reality speak to us and responding in that. So there was a real discipline. That's why I asked about your martial arts. And because we had that, we were able to set things up quickly and continue to deliver value. That's the real reason we're able to do it, because we cultivated a way of thinking about it. And there's no magic about that, but it's hard because so many people have so many dramatic issues and so many things that are dreadfully important. And you have all these single issue, passionate people in your face day in, day out, which as a leader, you've got to be looking out. And so one of the big attributes we need to bring into leaders growing forward is that idea, your idea of your, 745th Dan or whatever it is you are now. And that mindset, you have to get people to understand that. You also have to understand that rationality matters, that vision matters, capacity to imagine matters. And that all comes from an understanding, a better understanding of what being normal means. And I think by forcing people, firstly, to think you have to be exceptional, extraordinary. I'm going to be the super team, the super individualist. I'm going to be the one, the great leader. So to me, it's a myth, and you're setting up people for narcissism and non-performance. I prefer the Danish, what they call a law of Jante, which is Jon's law, which is, and you look it up, it's Jante. It's basically the Danish way of being, which is, you are not greater than us. You are not cleverer than us. You can never tell us what to do, us being the group, the collective. And we go into a room, we think we're separate from the collective. But actually, the Danes go in a room and they enter a collective of which you are one contributing piece. You know what I mean? And you stop trying to dominate that and be the person who is the most clever in the room, because you realize that you can never be more clever than the collective.
Yeah.
If that collective is engaged properly, it's always going to see better. So be the person who facilitates that collective thinking. And I think that's what good leaders need to do in these times of great drama. It's not that you don't have an opinions. I'm a very strong believer. I might bore people often at work. I say strong opinions lightly held. Strong opinions lightly held. Have strong opinions, but be light with them, because when you hear a counter argument that is actually truthfully convincing, allow yourself to move. Because if you're so scared if you're so wedded to your opinion, you can't move. What are you?
Yeah.
You're so brittle. You're not going to anticipate change, and you're going to break when it hits you anyway. So love your mind.
I'm going to keep with the martial arts analogies, if I may. But like I said, I trained in Japan I taught in Japan for a long period of time, and obviously I dabbled in other martial arts, and one of them was Judo. And that's one of their core principles, is that it's that hard and soft. So you hold on tight, but flexibly, because if you don't, if you are so rigid in your approach, it's actually very easy to overcome you. But when you are in that space of that flexible rigidity almost, it's incredibly difficult as an opponent to take you to the ground or throw you. So it's just interesting, and applying that then to leadership is, again, having that the dogma, the framework, but then being flexible in terms of that understanding. Something I do want to compliment you on, if I may, and it's not to blow smoke up your arse or anything like that, but the way you articulated.
I love compliments. It really gives me hard work, I'm sure. Now I get somebody says something good, and I really appreciate it. My ego then gears up and then wants to own it, and I have to tame that. But taming your ego is the secret to success.
Absolutely.
You can't suppress it. You have to use it. You have to use it. It must be your servant, not your master.
100%.
Yeah.
What I was going to say was that the way you articulated the way Henley moved through the last 12 months in that pivot was almost word for word what the engagement that I've had from others in Henley. So other facilitators, other lecturers. And it just, again, when you were talking and reflecting on that, was that um, the compliment is that your people understood the vision. They understood and were able to articulate where you saw as the leader the business was going and what the business needed to do. So that for me, it's a huge feather in the cap that that your people were able to actually articulate that very similarly to the way you've just articulated it now. So and that's the one compliment for the day. We talk.
Of course, they're not my people. They're our community, yeah, of which I'm privileged to be part. But anyway,
That's
I know
brilliant.
what you mean.
Absolutely. Part of that, that's like you said now, the ego and the as a leader, potentially you get that big head. We talk about authenticity in leadership, and we often talk about the massive successes that we've seen, the heroes, but we often forget that leadership is down and dirty. It's a tough job to have. You're leading people, you've got a huge amount of responsibility, and we don't often talk about the failures. From your context, is there anything that in the last 30 years that you could look at and go, well, I actually could have done this a lot better? And what can a new leader?
The last 30 minutes or last 30 seconds?
Last 30 seconds. Last 30 seconds.
It's an endless roll of error. It's an endless. I mean, again, we want to be so exceptional that we desperately fear our mistakes. Mistakes are bad things. Don't get me wrong. I mean, and they can kill people very rapidly.
Yeah.
So, but pilots make lots of mistakes. So do doctors.
Don't tell us that. They're perfect. They're godlike.
Well, yeah. That's what we believe, isn't it? And that's and we need to believe that for our own sanity. But pilots make lots of mistakes, so do doctors. But the safety record in aviation is much better than in medicine generally. Although I'm married to a doctor, so
okay, you're going to get in trouble.
And what's the reason? Well, I think the reason is that in aviation you are trained. You train to catch your mistakes at the earliest possible moment. And you have a responsibility as a co-pilot to challenge. If you don't, you're in trouble. That's what didn't happen with KPMG and those other companies with state capture. People wandered off. Whereas in some medicine, although it's changing fantastically in many places, there was too much of an autocracy, too much fear of challenging authority. Nobody could dare to do it, and so aberrations happened. So we make very fast mistakes in aviation and in Henley, but you try and catch them very early. And that's all about being conscious, seeing the movement before it happens. You've got to, and you can't be attached to your actions in the same way, because you might desperately want to do that. If you're so attached to the outcome, you won't see the unintended consequences and the toxic results, the downside of what you've done. You'll filter them out. There's an awful lot of control. So there's one other thing I wanted to say very quickly about corporate life and about leadership. We do believe that the corporation is a huge, solid thing of massive importance and reverence, and so it is. But we think leadership must be the same. And somehow as a leader, you must be the person who represents that corporation of stability and status and whatever. Well, you can look at some great leaders, around the world, and some of the greatest ones don't fit that mold at all. You can pick on some in South Africa. You look at Adrian Gore, for example. He's not that sort of person. Sure, he's got a very strong opinion, I'm sure, and a very, very well articulated point of view. But it's not that sort of dynamic. That's why Discovery has done so well. It's really intelligent people being deeply challenged, often called to task. But it's not just a dogma. It's a fluid process, I think. And again, we can't revere that form of leadership because you're trying to fit yourself into a mold. Real leadership is the things I think we're talking about. And the other thing about real leadership is you have to get results. And when you talk about ethics, we want to be ethical, like we want to be some seer or somebody up in an ivory tower, some priest pontificating about ethics. Ethics means getting good results. If you're ethical, you'll get things will happen that are better, and things that aren't bad, that aren't good, won't happen. And so being ethical means actually being productive, being able to put the good things into the world, which means that you're going to get in messy. Real ethics isn't tidy. It isn't clean. It's always a dynamic balance, and you never quite know where you are. Unless you're in some religious dogma of some sort where you're absolutely certain you're absolutely right. Being ethical and practicing ethics is a continual dynamic between getting it wrong and getting it right. So, I mean, I've been called out on pushing too hard and not listening to people. I've been called out. I've made mistakes about some contracts I've done by pulling in stuff that hasn't worked and wasted money. So many things, really. I can't even think of how many things I've done wrong, endlessly, and so have my colleagues. Because the point is, we don't hide the things we're doing wrong. We challenge. We have quite a challenging culture, and I encourage it. We have a concept of candor, which is not mindlessly venting on somebody. We don't like that either. You've got to be conscious about it, but it's dangerous to let mistakes happen. And so we have a very strong culture of empathy as well. But it's a very strange thing. Empathy, if somebody comes in front of you is really upset, I'm really loyal to this person. I had this conversation this morning about somebody, and somebody said, I'm really loyal to X, Y, and Z. And I don't want this to happen, because is this job going to be affected? And I said, I'm loyal too, But what are we talking about with empathy here? Do you shift your perception and your judgment so you satisfy this one person here and you worry about this one person's job? What I call little e empathy, or as a leader, do you cultivate big E empathy, where you look at the whole system?
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to fire people, you have to move people on, you have to change people. We don't like to fire, but we've really worked to fit, and it's worked well for us. We try and move people around. But you've got to think of the whole system as a leader. You've got all the employees, all their families, all your clients, all your customers. You've got your role in society. You've got an exemplary role in society. Businesses should be creating examples for other businesses to follow of how to create value in society, because that's actually a better way of doing business, in my view.
Yeah.
Business is about creating value, not about creating toxicity. You can do business that way. But, good luck to you when you go and try and explain to your very transparent grandchildren, who've got all the data now because it's come out. Yeah. And they say, why did you do that? And you say, oh, crikey, I thought it was the right thing at the time. Well, it wasn't. And so be conscious. So the one thing I would say is that I could list my mistakes endlessly, and I do, actually. I mean, sometimes it crushes me. I think, crikey, why am I doing this job? Yeah. But we are very big on that. We say, everybody who does a course says, will they find me out? It's the imposter syndrome. We all have the imposter syndrome. We love our imposter syndromes. We talk about them. This is why I feel imposter. That's why I feel an imposter. All it is this noisy parrot sitting on your shoulder saying, you can't do it. You can't do it. You're useless. They're going to find you out. Oh, you can't do it. And on the other shoulder is the little quiet voice of Yoda saying, oh, do it, you can, and you've got to listen to one or the other and say, you have to kill the parrot. KTFP, kill the parrot. Yeah. Fantastic. And you know what I mean? Because that voice is always there. If you can't see mistakes that you make, you can't really progress. If you are completely disabled by your mistakes of fear or shame, then you need to do work on your shame. You need to understand what shame is doing to you. Where does that shame come from? Why is that disabling you? You can take accountability, but you don't have to crush yourself. Yeah. Everyone makes mistakes, everybody, and they should do, because unless you're trying new things, mistake. You can say, you tried this, it didn't work out. It's a mistake. Actually, it's an experiment. Let's say your experiment, these first 100 experiments didn't work. Are they mistakes or just experiments?
You learn something from
them. Be very conscious. I rambled on there. I'm so sorry.
No, that's perfect. It's good. The last question around this, and I think it's pretty much answered in terms of the way you've spoken. But you are a strategist. Your background is in strategy, but you've spoken a lot about culture. Particularly at Henley, and the importance of that during a time like this, where the world has changed. It's a clean slate.
What do you think is going to get us through? Is it the strategic element, or is it the cultural element that really going to get businesses through, and leaders being particularly aware of that? Where do you think the focus should be?
Well, there's a huge amount of fear for the future, fear for my children, fear for your kids, fear for our families, fear for our future. I think that fear is really worth embracing. Again, not to be disabled by.
Yeah.
We don't like fear. It makes us feel bad. But, look at your fear, let it speak to you. It's saying something, not the little neurotic fears, but, the big things. Find what you're scared of and look at it. That's a really important thing. And it's not like that's easy. Of course it's not. It's horrible. But you've got it. So that's one thing that's going to get us through. You can't be wishing away a pandemic. We are hugely on top, I hope, of safety measures. We understood the need for ventilation 6-8 months ago, long before it came out with the CDC and all that. The moment you see it's aerosolized, you realize that it sits in the air, and the most dangerous thing is the air you breathe.
Yeah. It's
not even the droplets. How do you manage air and contain its spots? So I think you've got to embrace your fear, but not be disabled by it. And the reason that's important is I think facing fear releases massive amount of innovative and warrior energy. I really do. And I think that's then, right, I've seen it for what it is. Now I can do something about it. Second thing, I think you've got to be in a virtual world, I think, and I'm not doing this very well at the moment myself, but I think you've got to be more rigid in a sense in terms of recording the things you do and your activities. You've got to manage projects comprehensively, and you've got to write down things that you could hold in the sort of conversation sphere of the company. That's fractured a bit at the moment. Second, and beyond that, you've got to really think about the world we're living in. We do need to make productive work. People need purpose. You need skills. People need hope. The biggest thing is not particular skill that people have, but the belief they have to have X, Y, or Z skill. The biggest skill we need now is the capacity, I think, for people to just keep learning. If you look at there was a guy called Nick Spall at Stellenbosch who did some really good research, and of 100 people who started school, 60 take matric, 37 pass, 12 go to university, 6 get a degree within 6 years. In 100 people going to school, 63 don't get a matric, and 10 go to university effectively. And in UK, it's 50 go to university.
Sure.
And so what you've got this massive number of people who are normal people, normal brains, normal intelligence, normal capacity to communicate, who don't think they're normal. They think they have to be superheroes to succeed. Whereas all you have to be is embrace your normal and work with it. That's more than enough for anybody. I mean, do you have to be a superhero to be a black belt in karate? You have to be a normal person who works at it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it. You can be a black belt, you can be anything, but you've got to understand that what you've got is good enough.
Yeah.
And most people don't believe that. And the education system, the exclusion, the damage of apartheid, all the isms, like colonialization, all these things, and the other things we live with now, they're damaging people's ability just simply to believe in themselves. We've made this cult of being abnormal or special. Let's kill that. And I think we've just got to let go of that and start educating ourselves and learning and making lifelong learning your biggest passion, and not even qualifications. Be curious, go on LinkedIn, go to Udemy, go to Coursera, do a martial arts course, find learning wherever you can, but then apply it into your life. And above all else, I think what Yuval Noah Harari talks about in his fear of the algorithm that sits under our skin and knows what you want way before you know what you want, because it's been judging your behavior and puts up in front of you this or that image that attracts you more than that one, but you don't even know it's doing it. If you want to be successful in this AI world, you have to know yourself really, really well.
Yeah.
And you have to know yourself in action, which means that it's going to be messy. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have to learn to forgive yourself. You're going to have to learn to just keep on going. And you're just going to have a sense of humor and a desperate passion to get along with life. And think of a world that's prosperous rather than that you're individually rich. Because if you're individually rich in a poor world, you've got a shit life. Actually, it's as a human. But we can have a decent life, you know. That's what the Kiwis are great at. They're good at making life good for everybody, really. Although a lot of people wouldn't agree. In New Zealand, that's their strength.
Yeah.
Did that help? I'm sorry, I'm rambling on a lot.
Jon, it's been absolutely fascinating. I wish we had about 6 hours together. I think we could fill that quite easily. But it's been massively insightful. Thank you so much for your candor. Thank you for your authenticity. And I'd definitely love to have you back on again at some point. There's a lot of topics that we didn't touch, which I think we could definitely do. So I really, really do appreciate it.
But you know, it's the interviewer who's the one who gets all this out. It's where the interviewer sits. It's the interviewer's consciousness that creates all this. So you can, you know, well done you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. But yeah, listen, all the best.
And good luck to you. And thank you for a great interview. Really appreciate it. And come and talk to us. Maybe you can do some work with us. You seem to be really switched on. It would be a pleasure.
We'll make a plan. We'll make a plan.
Okay, right. Take it easy. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks,